Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gary Levinson. I'm the Artistic Director of the Chamber Music Society of Fort Worth. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to our pre-concert talk. You know, this concert is an especially spectacular time for us because we have commissions, and we have another one coming next year, just as a small preview. But I can't think of a better partner to introduce this program and to talk about commissions than Laurie Shulman, our good friend. Please help me welcome her.
Thank you, Gary, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be back in Fort Worth, and thank you for arranging for perfect weather for this weekend. We're all happy when autumn finally comes to North Texas. Yes, my late husband used to say that the change in temperature occurred during halftime of the Texas OU game.
That's
over
it.
at the Cotton Bowl. And it seems to have arrived just on time. Yes. We have an extraordinary program for you this afternoon, not only with these extraordinary artists, the very gifted young quartet, the Dover Quartet, but also because if you look at your program, the entire first half of the program is by living composers. And this is an unusual approach for CMSFW to have taken, but this is a signal year and a very important set of instrumental works that we're showcasing in the first half with a surprisingly close connection to the Warhorse, the Dvořák American Quartet, which is featured on the second half.
Yeah, so the most important thing to remember in the first half, as Laurie mentioned, is not only do we have living composers here, but composers that play instruments all the time. Now, this may seem like a foregone conclusion to most of you, but I can tell you that I play quite a few new works, and one way or the other, there are quite a few composers that don't play their instruments or an instrument virtuosically as the two composers we're presenting today. So it's very exciting to hear their work.
Just as a quick overview, Jessie Montgomery, whose work Strum opens the program, is a practicing active violinist. She also happens to be composer in residence with the Chicago Symphony. This woman has a pretty terrific career going for herself, but she comes from string playing, and her piece is all about string playing. We're going to get to it in just a second. Jerod Tate, who is the commissioned composer this afternoon, is a pianist who was educated in piano performance. He took a degree from Northwestern and then a master's in piano performance and competition a little bit later from the Cleveland Institute of Music, which is one of the finest music schools in the United States.
One of the great conservatories, yes.
And our old friend Antonín Dvořák was a violist. He tells stories in his memoirs and letters about having played in an orchestra when Bedřich Smetana was conducting. So Dvořák understood string playing as well, and that is a common thread that's very important to all four of the pieces that we will hear. We open with a work by Jessie Montgomery, and we're going to talk about the Montgomery and then the Dvořák, and then devote the second half of our talk to the new pieces by Jerod Tate. Jessie Montgomery is an African-American woman who got launched through a program that's operated out of Detroit called the Sphinx Organization. They are devoted to nurturing talent among young musicians of color and not mainstream, like dead white European males. So they're Hispanic and Latinx and Black artists from all over the country. They've had astounding success in identifying some major, really important talents in American music. It's a dynamic program.
And they've also expanded not just from chamber music. They started rather small, but they now have an orchestra and they have tours and they commission works. So they really, I think they'll be seen historically speaking as one of the most important commissioning organizations in the 21st century.
Absolutely, and Jessie Montgomery is one of their stars. Now, the piece that opens the program is one of her best-known pieces. It originated, as we're going to hear it, for string quartet, but it has become so popular that it has now been arranged for chamber orchestra, for full string orchestra, and some other combinations of instruments. In fact, Gary, you have played it as an orchestral musician, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and what's really important to understand is that, like, for example, this series, we sort of avoid arrangements. Why? Because there's something to be lost from the original when you arrange it for a different piece of instrumentation or orchestra versus chamber music. We want to be true to the composer's intentions. Well, this is the exception because she actually arranged it for string orchestra after the original version you're about to hear this afternoon. And having played it, I can tell you it's equally successful. There's actually a corollary in the Adagio for strings.
I was just thinking of that because Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings originated as the slow movement to his string quartet.
And one of my teachers said to Barbara, why don't you do that as a string orchestra? You'll make more money and people will love it. And she was right.
She was absolutely right. Okay, strum, what do we think of? You don't strum a violin, you strum a guitar, or maybe a mandolin, or maybe a banjo, maybe an ukulele, which is my understanding of how the Hawaiians say it. Anyhow, what she is doing is celebrating the greater family of string instruments and not just violin, cello, viola. So let's listen to an excerpt from near the beginning of Jessie Montgomery's Strum. What you're going to hear is pizzicato in two of the instruments, and then we're going to hear a melody added above that that's played with the bow. Track 1, please. Gary, you're a string player. Describe to us the contrast in the way 2 against 2 are playing here.
So what she's basically doing is actually a melody and accompaniment. So you have the one melodic voice with 3 strings playing pizzicato. What's amazing about pizzicato and exciting, I think, for most composers is there's 2 things going on. You have the harmonic element where you hear the actual pitch, but there's also the percussive element of activating the string. And I think it's the smoothness of the legato and the percussive element of the pizzicato which makes it a compelling melody.
A little bit later in the piece, she has a section where all 4 players are using their bows, but then she reverts to the pizzicato. So she never lets you get too comfortable with either approach, and she's constantly drawing attention to the contrasting types of sound that can be produced on string instruments just with these 2 fundamental techniques, bowing and pizzicato. Let's hear track 2, please. We got a little bit of flamenco action going there.
Yeah. All of a sudden, because she changes the rhythm, but the technique is the same. Now you have a more of a heroic, more of an exciting Spanish and flavor infused melody.
There you go. All right. Well, the Jessie Montgomery piece is short. It's maybe 7-8 minutes. Yeah. It's a single movement work, and we're going to leapfrog past intermission now and talk about the Dvořák, and we'll come back to the 2 works by Jerod Tate. Dvořák's American Quartet dates from roughly the same period as his most famous work, the New World Symphony. It's called American because it was written on American soil, and there's no question about the fact that Dvořák was profoundly captivated by and interested in 2 specific aspects of American music. One was the oral tradition of what used to be called Negro spirituals, and that's the terminology that he would have used. And he learned about this from a young black composer and music student named Henry Thacker Burley. But he was also interested in the music of the indigenous Native American tribes, what we used to call American Indians. And that is, again, the terminology that Dvořák would have used in the 1890s. What's extraordinary about this quartet is that some of the rhythmic patterns, and particularly the scale patterns that he uses, are also common in Bohemian and Moravian folk music, which was the music of Dvořák's home country. Mm-hmm. So we are going to listen now to the opening of the American Quartet, which features an astounding solo for viola. Viola, the forgotten member of the string quartet. Dvořák loved viola. It was his principal instrument, and he did more than any other late 19th century composer to put both viola and cello in the spotlight in a way that they never had been before.
Absolutely. I mean, Dvořák also is very well known for the cello concerto, but if you think of Mozart, who also loved viola, you skipped all the way through Berlioz to Dvořák, where he puts in viola solos absolutely everywhere, in the string quintets, in his piano quintets, in the piano quartets, just about everywhere you got a big viola solo, so you know he was truly a fan.
So let's listen to the beginning of the Dvořák Quartet, where we feature this gorgeous theme for viola. Track 3, please. Now, I don't know if you noticed there, but when the violin took over that melody, the cello switched to pizzicato.
That's it.
So Jesse Montgomery is drawing on a time-honored tradition of contrasting these two to add rhythmic and textural variety to the music.
And that's an excellent point. You know, when you take the same melody and you put it up an octave higher, you also have to do something with the other instruments, otherwise they can cancel each other out. So Dvořák understood this, and he knows that by giving pizzicato there, you both give excitement to the music, but also a harmonic center that is easier to listen to and hear.
And like all skilled composers, Dvořák wanted to show off how well he understood counterpoint and the technique of writing for string instruments. My next example is from the development section of this first movement, which is in sonata form, and you're going to hear it building to a fugato where you have imitative entrances from all 4 instruments. They're pretty easy to hear, and it's quite dynamic the way he does it. Track 4, please. It's really very skillfully done, and it kind of does keep the foot tapping there, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I want to draw the audience's attention to the tempo. The way he writes it, this is a relatively slow fugue, and why would you do a slow fugue versus a fast fugue? Because fugues are, by their very essence, very complicated, and they're complicated to listen to, and they're complicated to compose. So if you do things that happen very, very quickly, it's hard to catch all the detail. So in this slow tempo, you hear all of the entrances, you hear all of the counter melodies, and it's a much more effective way of composing.
We're going to move now to the slow movement, which has an ambiguity of key center. Sometimes it sounds like it's in major mode, sometimes it sounds like it's in minor mode. The music is very plaintive, a little bit on the mournful side, and both Gary and I hear in this Dvořák leaning into the black spiritual tradition, which is looking for salvation to lead to a better life in heaven after the life on this earth. Let's listen to track 5, please. Right, you could hear how he's seesawing back and forth between major and minor. Now, this next example is from the scherzo and then in quick succession from the trio. And what I want you to be listening for is a similarity of themes. A lot of the themes throughout this quartet are in a pentatonic scale. Penta means 5, tonic means the pitches, and think of it as the black keys on a piano. Those 5 pitches transposed to whatever key he's writing in. Let's listen to track 6. This is from the scherzo. What he's doing when he slows down there is essentially a variation on the theme that he has given us.
And that theme has 3 and 4 kind of built into it. So even though the piece is in 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, by shifting it 1 beat, there seems to be an extra beat there.
So he's playing a little bit of rhythmic games with us too, which is something he may have learned from his colleague and mentor, Johannes Brahms.
For sure.
Yes. Now moving to the trio section, which moves from the home key of F major to F minor. Essentially, though, it's the same thematic contour, those same 5 pitches, and we're using variation technique on the same basic idea, but in a different register. You'll hear it's going to jump to 2 octaves higher. Let's hear track 7, please. Moving on to the finale, what you will hear again is a remarkable consistency of thematic material. He's using this whole pentatonic idea throughout the entire 4 movements of the quartet. We have a lot of syncopations, very lively rhythms, which are typical of Bohemian folk music, but also typical of the Native American music that so influenced his writing in larger pieces like the New World Symphony. Track 8, please. It's definitely dancing music.
And it's definitely very positive. You know, key centers, you hear us talk about that all the time. This is firmly in F major, which is one of the most positive keys you can possibly have.
Absolutely. And it gets ever more exuberant and complex, but Dvořák is not afraid to turn on a dime and surprise us with a different key center, which is what he does in this passage from later in the finale. Let's hear track 9, please.
Well, we should talk about the slide, though. Spillville, Iowa is somewhere where Dvořák traveled from New York City, where he was living very close to my alma mater, which was downtown on the east side at the time. He was living on East 12th Street, and Spillville, Iowa was somewhere where he went to visit a Bohemian colony. But what's important is that the spirituals Laurie spoke about before, he was traveling the country actually listening to stuff like that, so he knew exactly what it sounded like in its original state and then translate that into his chamber music and also the Ninth Symphony as well.
We are going to move now to our featured composer, Jerod Tate, who unfortunately is unable to be with us today. It's because he has a big opera premiere coming up, but he very generously sent us a short video to give us a brief introduction about his largest new work, and then we're going to bring out a member of the Dover Quartet to talk about the commission.
So here's a short video about his work. This is Jerod, and here's the video.
So Jerod Tate is a Chickasaw composer. He is a member of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma.
So we're very, very happy that not only is the Dover Quartet here to perform for us, but Camden Shaw, the celebrated cellist of the quartet, is very kindly going to join us in this pre-concert talk and answer a few questions and tell us all about this incredible thing that's called a commission. Let's please welcome Camden Shaw.
So, Camden, all four of you are graduates of the Curtis Institute of Music, which I think most of our audience knows is an extremely prestigious music school based in Philadelphia. What you may not know is that the students also include singers and conductors and composers in addition to instrumentalists. So can you tell us a little bit about how much new music you and your colleagues were exposed to during your years as students at Curtis?
Yeah, we actually, I think the school made it a point to have that a part of our musical fabric every year. The way that they did it, and I think to an extent continue to do it now, is that each year has a theme of sorts. So there were some years that were very, very involved with new music, even more so than the norm. But even on a year that was focused on Beethoven or Schoenberg, as there were years like that, there was a lot of new music. The composition students were a big part of the school, and actually routinely we would sight read, the whole orchestra would sight read through their pieces for a recording session. And it was really, really amazing to see what ideas worked so well right away, what ideas they were still workshopping, and sort of being part of that experience with the younger composers as well. It was very cool.
We know that you and Jerod Tate found a point of commonality in your admiration for Pura Fé's vocal ensemble. Can you tell us a little bit about which came first, the suggestion for the Pura Fé orchestration or the suggestion for the original piece, Jerod Tate's Woodland songs, which don't involve singing except in the realm of the imagination?
That's a great question, and actually it's kind of hard for me to answer. It's a little bit like two elements of our lives coming together, and coincidentally, it's kind of how the quartet formed. Actually, was from two duos that then started playing together. But I guess how I would start is by saying that my aunt is a language revitalizationist who works with the Smithsonian Institution, and her life has been about pursuing languages that are perhaps dwindling and need recognition and need sustaining. And so she's worked a lot with First Nations tribes all over the United States and also abroad. And she was the one who gave me a CD of Eulali, that group of Pura Fé, when I was growing up. And it's just incredible, incredible singing and music making if you have not heard it. So I was already familiar with that. And the quartet then recorded all the Beethoven quartets over a few years. And our engineer and producer for that project knew Jerod very well. And he said, someday you should try to work with this guy. He's really, really amazing, very genuine, very potent individual, and which he is. He's an amazing force of nature, Jerod. And so we had that in the back of our mind. And knowing that, this project started to come together of wanting to explore Dvořák's American quartet and the influences that existed for it, and also sort of the state of the art, as it were, today, with people part of the Chickasaw Nation, for instance. And so it all just really came together. These sounds that you really do hear in the Dvořák quartet, it's very helpful to have them in your ear in the first half of the experience. So it just all came together, and we found out that Jerod knew Pura Fé and knew Eulali's singing very well. It all snowballed in a wonderful way very quickly from there.
And Woodland Songs was the bonus that came out of that initial idea. Yes. All right. So in the commission for the new piece, how much latitude did you give him? Did you put down and say, we want this, this, and this? Or did you say, hey, write us a piece and you've got carte blanche?
Much more the latter. And I think Jerod, to his credit, his vision is so concrete that I don't think he would probably work with someone who said, you have to do something in this little box. He's so, when he gets inspired, he's going to do what he's going to do. And I think the only thing that we had for him was a basic length. We wanted it to be something that could fit on a first half, so nothing, beyond 40 minutes in length. But really everything was open. And I love his solution was, in a way, exploring, multiple movement work, something we're really familiar with in the quartet field, but using these different animals as inspiration, and not only animals, but the associations in the Chickasaw Nation of what those animals mean, because they're also smaller clans within the Chickasaw tribe, and these clans are often ascribed an animal. And so for him, these animal titles that you'll see, it's not just about a squirrel, it's about the clan that goes by that name as well.
Exactly, and I would like to draw to your attention that the images that you're seeing on the screen are slides that Jerod Tate sent me as representative of his individual movements in the 5 Woodland songs that we will be hearing when the quartet performs them. Okay, so how involved were you and the other members of the Dover Quartet in the composition and orchestration process? Did he consult with you, is this playable? Were there issues like that?
There were a couple. I hope this isn't too boring of an answer. Yeah, we were involved. There are some interesting things that happen in a quartet where you can have the same notes in total, but distribute them differently, if that makes sense. Yeah. And so there were some situations where he wanted open strings and he wanted fingered melodies going on at the same time. And he had explored different solutions, one in which someone's holding an open string and playing on a higher string above it, or another scenario where someone's holding only open strings and the other person's playing octaves. They sound completely different, actually, even though in total you're getting the same exact notes. So we worked a lot on things like that, and we're continuously working with him on it because this project is all going to be part of an album as well, a CD. So, a CD, I should just say, a digital.
Album. Still album.
Yeah, an album.
I have a question about that. Did he ask for any special effects, like playing behind the bridge or anything, stuff that you either nixed or you did encourage him to do?
Great question. Yeah, actually, the techniques are all fairly standard, which is really cool. I actually like that the sounds will still feel very new, but he's not asking for a lot of extended techniques. He does do some stuff, and of course, I get to talk about my part since I'm the cellist. And yeah, he does some stuff in the fish movement where there are some pizzicati that have some really interesting and challenging rolled chords going on, and those were, I think, for me, the things that actually took by far the most figuring out technique-wise. But it's a really, really beautiful and accessible work. But you will have heard it twice today, which is awesome. So you'll know it very well.
Yeah, we were cheating by listening to them rehearse.
We arrived early enough to do our cheater listening, exactly. So I believe most of the audience knows that this performance this afternoon is part of the Dover Quartet's world premiere tour. They are performing this program or a close cousin of it in many venues around the United States. The actual world premiere took place in August in Rhode Island, if I recall correctly.
That is true, although I would say, don't tell anyone, but actually the Rattle songs were not complete at that time. So you're still amongst the very first people to hear Rattle songs, because those we actually didn't play on the world premiere. So yeah,
Well,
they're very fresh.
My question is that for the Rattle songs, did Jerod talk you through with this imagery and the lore and the history and the tradition and heritage of these individual Chickasaw clans?
Actually, no, we haven't gotten into that so much yet. I think there's been so much to talk about just with the emotive nature of the music, really almost in a concrete way, that I'm sure we will get into that in the future, but we're still working on the emotive, communicative aspects, I think.
Which makes perfectly good sense. I'm just wondering if we as listeners want to be thinking of this as program music, in the sense that it was inspired by something extra musical rather than purely abstract music.
That's a great question. My instinct would tell me that it's a little bit like Beethoven, where it will go in and out of both of those. So you could have something that will like you'll hear it in the bird movement, the woodpecker. You'll hear right away the sound of a woodpecker, which is obviously programmatic. But then he goes into very abstract thinking right after that. So I think it's a wonderful mixture, and it's sort of. It goes comfortably in between those worlds.
Well, I am absolutely certain that Jerod Tate would be deeply honored to know that you had compared him to Beethoven in terms of one of the aspects of his piece. Yeah. Based on what you know of his music, do you think this is consistent with his overall style, or does it represent a departure?
I think it's fairly consistent. You know, as I was hearing some of his music coming out too, there's just there's a power to his writing, a directness, and a comfort with tonality that actually already will sound familiar to us in many ways. A lot of open fifths, a lot of resonance. He's not trying to go plumb the depths of chromaticism or atonal things in the way that some people are and have been for more than 100 years now. But he's searching for something that's still very new and still very fresh, and yet will sound as though it's within a tonal landscape that you know and like. So.
Before we send you back to warm up, would you just tell the audience what you would like them to be listening for, or is it just to sit back and let this gorgeous music roll all over you? What message would you like the audience to have hearing Rattle songs and Woodland songs for the first time?
Well, I think I would love for anyone to do what's right for their personality, and if you want to just enjoy it and not think too much, it's going to come over you in a wonderful way. If you want to, be listening for something, I think in the Rattle songs you could listen for the way that the bow for us as a bowed string player, relates to vowel sounds in the singing voice, and the way that you can try to emulate these kind of like diphthong shapes in the voice. And I mean, the human voice is the most amazing instrument of all, really. When you are able to listen to the complexity that a mouth can make, and the sound, not only the consonants, but the vowel changes, it's really amazing. But we're really trying to do a lot of that subtle stuff in the Rattle songs to match this incredible recording that Eulalie made. So if you have not heard that, I encourage every audience. I mean, that recording is unlike anything you have ever heard. If you haven't
For those of you who are interested in pursuing that, it's mentioned in my program note on the Pura Fé Rattle song. So it is there in writing in your program. Well, Camden Shaw, it's extremely generous and gracious of you to have given us these few minutes of insight into these works this afternoon. And I'm sure that everyone is as eager as I am to hear your performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
I would encourage all of you, by the way, to hit us up on Instagram and tell us, be it in person or on Instagram, the things that Camden spoke about. What does this music actually invoke in your imaginations? Because we really would want to hear from you. It's the way we understand how our audience reacts to this kind of music, and especially as a world premiere like this tour is. You're really in a very special position to hear something that really very, very few people have heard, especially in concert.
And reactions from an audience, the immediacy of that is extremely important to the composer as well.
And to the performers. I mean, for us to really feel the energy that we always have in this room and how you react to new music is invaluable. So I encourage you to reach out to us as much as possible. I'll be over there in the intermission if you want to talk to me direct. I'd love to do that.
a short break and music in about 15 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.